Most men would have smashed the laptop screen when they saw their wife doing that with another man. But I didn't. I'm an ex-Army signals intelligence officer, and when I found a hidden folder on an old hard drive labeled Napa, girls only, I didn't see a betrayal. I saw an intelligence leak. The video showed my perfect wife in a rental house, looking into the camera 11 days before our wedding and slurring, "This is my last night of freedom. Don't tell Ethan." But the man holding her wasn't a stranger. It was the guy who signed my paychecks. In that second, my marriage turned into a tactical operation. I didn't cry. I copied the drive, encrypted the evidence, and spent the next 3 months building a trap that would cost them their careers, their reputations, and their sanity. You think you know revenge? Let me show you how to execute a controlled detonation. My name is Ethan Brooks. I am a former Army Signals Intelligence Specialist who now works as a senior cybersecurity analyst for a mid-sized tech firm in Austin, Texas. On paper, my existence is the very definition of the American dream. I earn a 6-figure salary, I drive a late-model SUV, and I own a starter home in a quiet subdivision where the lawns are manicured with military precision. And then there is my wife, Sarah. To the outside world, she is the radiant bride, the woman who smiles perfectly in every photograph. If you looked at our shared Instagram account, you would see a curated feed of brunch dates, hiking trips, and captions filled with heart emojis. We are the golden couple that people envy. However, 8 months into this marriage, the honeymoon glow should still be present, yet the atmosphere inside our house feels wrong. It is not a chaos that you can hear, it is a silence that you can feel. In the intelligence community, we are trained to listen to the noise floor, the background static of a specific environment. When that static changes, or when the air goes dead, you know a threat is imminent. My marriage has dead air. The light in our living room feels colder than it used to. Our conversations have become efficient, transactional, and short. She is always tired at night, always overwhelmed by new projects at her marketing firm, and always not in the mood when I try to initiate any physical connection. I am not a man who requires constant validation, but I know the difference between fatigue and avoidance. I began to notice the small details that most American men ignore until it is too late. I call them the tells. The first anomaly was her phone. In the first year of our relationship, her phone was just a tool. Now, it is an extension of her hand, but it is always placed face down on the coffee table. This is basic operational security. She has disabled the message previews on her lock screen. When a notification vibrates, her eyes dart to the device with a reflex speed that indicates high anxiety, yet she waits for me to look away before she checks it. Then there were the logistical inconsistencies. The late-night girls' dinners that began to stretch past midnight on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She would come home claiming they were just venting about work, but her energy was frantic, high-wired, not exhausted. One evening she returned at 2 a.m., smelling of a cologne that was definitely not mine. It was a heavy, expensive musk, something aged and oaky. When I asked her about the scent, she claimed she had hugged a friend who was wearing a strong perfume. Or perhaps it was the ambient smell of the steakhouse. I did not argue. I did not scream. I simply filed the data point away in my mind. My brain does not process emotion like a normal husband. It processes data like an operator. I started cataloging the discrepancies automatically. I would check the odometer on her car. She said she went to a bistro downtown, which is a 12-mile round trip. The odometer showed 40 miles added since the morning. Where did the other 28 miles go? I analyzed her credit card statements. There were charges for ride shares at times when she claimed to be driving her own car. There were withdrawals of cash, small amounts, strictly below the threshold that triggers a fraud alert, but frequent enough to establish a pattern. I am trained to recognize patterns. Intelligence is not about finding one smoking gun. It is about layering hundreds of small, seemingly innocent data points until a picture emerges. The picture forming in my head was ugly, but I refused to act on speculation. In my line of work, you do not launch a strike based on a hunch. You wait for confirmation. You wait for the signal to separate from the noise. That confirmation, or at least the path to it, arrived on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Sarah was out, claiming to be at a yoga workshop. I decided to clean out the spare room, a space we jokingly called the wedding graveyard. It was filled with plastic bins containing leftover reception napkins, dried floral arrangements, and boxes of thank you cards we never sent. I was breaking down cardboard boxes when I saw it. Tucked at the bottom of a container filled with bachelorette party decorations, plastic tiaras, and sashes was a small, black external hard drive. It was an older model, scratched and dusty. It seemed out of place among the glitter and pink ribbons. I picked it up. A piece of masking tape was stuck to the casing. On it, in Sarah's distinct, looping handwriting, were the words, Napa, girls only, do not open. My heart rate slowed down. This is a physiological response I developed in the field. When danger is close, my body goes cold. Do not open is not a request, it is a challenge. It implies that the content is either sensitive or damaging. I knew that whatever was on this drive was not just photos of wine tastings and spa treatments. You do not hide innocent memories in the bottom of a junk box. I walked to my home office, the drive heavy in my hand. The house was completely silent. The only sound was the rain hitting the window pane. I sat down at my desk, woke up my secure monitor, and held the USB cable. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, understanding that the man I was, right now the trusting husband, the partner, the believer in our vows, was about to cease existing. I plugged the drive in. The computer chimed, recognizing the device. The folder icon appeared on my screen. I double-clicked it, and the directory opened. The file directory on my screen looked innocuous at first glance. It was a digital scrapbook of a weekend in Napa Valley, filled with hundreds of high-resolution JPEGs. I scrolled through them with a detached, clinical efficiency. There were photos of Sarah and her 4 bridesmaids posing in front of vineyard gates, holding glasses of Cabernet, wearing matching oversized sunglasses. They looked happy, innocent, and expensive. It was the standard visual currency of the American upper-middle-class performative joy packaged for social media consumption. But intelligence work teaches you that the truth is rarely found in the folder labeled public. You have to look for the outliers. Deep in the subdirectory, buried beneath 2 layers of generic party photos, I found a video file. It was an unedited MOV file, significantly larger than the others. The file name was not automatic. It had been manually renamed, Last Night, Don't Show Anyone. The rain battered against the window of my home office, a rhythmic drumming that deepened the isolation of the empty house. Sarah was currently at brunch with those same bridesmaids, likely sipping mimosas and laughing about things I was not privy to. I hovered the mouse cursor over the file icon. My hand did not tremble. In my line of work, hesitation is a liability. I double-clicked. The media player opened. The audio hit me first, a distorted, bass-heavy thumping of club music and the high-pitched, chaotic shrieking of drunk women. The video quality was poor, shot on a handheld phone in low light, the frame shaking as the operator laughed. The setting was the living room of the luxury Airbnb they had rented, a modern glass and steel structure overlooking the valley. The timestamp in the corner of the player read 11:42 p.m. Sarah was in the center of the frame. She was not the poised, elegant woman who walks beside me at corporate galas. She was disheveled, her eyes glassy and unfocused, her hair a tangled mess. She was wearing a short white silk robe that was loosely tied, slipping off one shoulder to reveal the lace lingerie underneath. She was dancing, if you could call it that, grinding against the back of a leather sofa while her friends cheered her on. Then, the camera panned to the left, and a man walked into the frame. He was holding a bottle of champagne by the neck, moving with a confident, predatory swagger that instantly triggered a recognition response in my brain. His face was partially obscured by the shadows of the room, but I did not need to see his face. I knew the silhouette. I knew the posture, the slight forward lean of the shoulders, the arrogance of a man accustomed to taking up space. I paused the video and zoomed in on his left wrist. There it was, a vintage Omega Speedmaster Professional with a distressed leather strap. I knew that watch intimately. I had stared at it hundreds of times across a mahogany desk while asking for budget approvals. I had complimented him on it during my performance review 6 months ago, the same review where he told me I lacked the executive presence for a promotion. It was Ryan, my direct manager, the senior director of information security, the man who had shaken my hand at my wedding reception and told me I was one of the good ones. I pressed play again, and the nausea hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. It wasn't just that they were together. It was the familiarity. Ryan didn't touch her like a stranger at a party. He touched her like he owned the assets. He pulled her close, whispering something into her ear that made her throw her head back and laugh. The intimacy was practiced. This was not a drunk mistake. This was a routine. But the visuals were not the worst part. The audio was the kill shot. At the 2-minute mark, the friend holding the camera, Sarah's maid of honor, shouted over the music, "Sarah, be careful. What if Ethan sees this?" Sarah turned directly to the camera lens. Her face was flushed, her smile sloppy and reckless. She wrapped her arms around Ryan's neck, looked into the lens, looked right at me, across time and space, and slurred, "This is my last night of freedom, bitches. Don't tell Ethan." The room erupted in laughter. Ryan laughed too, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the speakers of my expensive home office setup. They were not just cheating on me, they were mocking me. To them, I was not a husband or a partner. I was an obstacle. I was the safe, boring beta test that secured the mortgage, while Ryan was the alpha who got the freedom. The betrayal wasn't just sexual, it was a complete demolition of my dignity. I sat there in the gray light of a rainy Sunday, watching my life dissolve in 1080p resolution. My instinct, the primitive, animal part of my brain, wanted to pick up the monitor and hurl it through the window. I wanted to drive to the brunch spot, drag her out of the restaurant, and scream until my throat bled. I wanted to burn the house down, but I didn't. The soldier in me stepped forward and shoved the husband aside. In the military, when you are under ambush, panic is death. You do not react emotionally, you react tactically. You assess the situation. You secure the perimeter. You identify the threat. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds, forced a deep breath into my lungs, and pushed the rage into a dark, cold box in the back of my mind. When I opened my eyes, the pain was still there, but it was distant now, separated from me by a layer of reinforced glass. I was no longer a victim. I was an analyst working a case. I minimized the video and right-clicked on the file. Properties. Details. I needed to verify the intelligence. I checked the metadata. Date created, June 14th. Time, 11:42 p.m. Device, iPhone 13 Pro. GPS coordinates, 38.29 newtons, 122. 28W, Napa Valley. June 14th. That was 11 days before our wedding. 11 days before I stood at the altar and promised to protect her with my life. 11 days before, Ryan sat at table 1 and drank my champagne. This wasn't a spontaneous lapse in judgment. This was a conspiracy. My wife, my boss, and her entire circle of friends were all co-conspirators in a fraud that had been running since before the marriage license was signed. I looked at the screen one last time, memorizing Ryan's face, memorizing the look in Sarah's eyes. The love I had for her didn't turn into hate instantly. It turned into something far more dangerous. Objective clarity. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a fresh, encrypted USB drive. I initiated a full copy of the folder. As the progress bar moved across the screen, I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. They thought I was the unsuspecting casualty. They had no idea they had just handed the enemy the encryption keys to their entire lives. The moment the file transfer bar hit 100%, I pulled the USB drive from my computer like I was removing a detonator from an explosive device. I did not just leave the evidence sitting on my desktop. In cybersecurity, data that exists in one place does not exist at all. I immediately uploaded the entire folder to a private, encrypted cloud server, a dead drop account I had created years ago for sensitive penetration testing tools. I protected it with AES 256 encryption and a 64-character password that existed only in my memory. Now, even if the house burned down, or if they found my laptop and wiped it, the truth was indestructible. With the assets secured, I shifted my operating mode from discovery to analysis. I treated my life not as a marriage, but as a compromised network that had suffered a catastrophic breach. I needed to know the extent of the infection. I started with a forensic audit of the past year. I pulled up our joint bank statements, her credit card transaction histories, and the archived chat logs from the iCloud family sharing plan she had forgotten we linked. I placed the video player on one side of my ultra-wide monitor and my spreadsheet on the other. I began to cross-reference the data points. The date of the Bachelorette party was June 14th. I looked at our credit card statement for that weekend. I saw a charge for $400 at a liquor store in Napa, paid for by our joint account. I stared at the line item. I had paid for the champagne they drank, while my boss had his hands on my fiancée. I had financed my own humiliation. I kept digging. I matched the dates of her late nights at the office over the last 6 months with Ryan's corporate travel schedule. The correlation was nearly perfect. When Ryan was in San Francisco for a conference, Sarah was visiting her sister in Oakland. When Ryan was working late on the Q3 budget, Sarah was stuck at a client dinner. The pattern was not subtle, it was blatant. They had grown lazy because they assumed I was blind. But the most damaging intelligence did not come from my personal accounts. It came from the office. I logged into the corporate network via my secure VPN. As a senior cybersecurity analyst, I have legitimate administrative privileges to audit access logs and project routing histories. I wasn't hacking. I was simply looking at the digital footprints left on the servers I was paid to protect. I navigated to the human resources and project management directories, searching for my own personnel file and project history. For the past year, I had been confused about my career stagnation. I had perfect performance metrics, yet I had been passed over for the lead security architect promotion twice. I had assumed it was budget cuts. I was wrong. I pulled the routing logs for the promotion review board. There, in black and white, were the manager comments. Ryan had flagged my file. He had not rejected me outright that would have looked suspicious. Instead, he had used the subtle corporate language of sabotage. He had written notes like, "Ethan is technically brilliant but lacks the necessary executive presence for leadership, and he is currently overwhelmed with personal commitments. Let's keep him in his current role for stability." I felt a cold rage stiffen my spine. Overwhelmed with personal commitments. He was creating the narrative that I was weak and distracted, while he was the one actively destroying my home life. He was not just sleeping with my wife. He was systematically suppressing my earning potential and my career growth to keep me beneath him. It was a power play. By keeping me in a lower tax bracket and a lower title, he maintained his dominance over me in every room, the boardroom, and the bedroom. He wanted me to be the submissive, grateful employee who thanked him for a 3% cost of living raise, unaware that he was stealing the life I was working to build. I disconnected from the corporate VPN and turned my attention back to the home front. I needed to know if the channel was still active right now. I accessed the administrator console of our home mesh Wi-Fi system. I did not need to install spyware on Sarah's phone. I just needed to look at the DNS requests and traffic logs passing through the router I purchased and configured. I filtered the traffic by her device's MAC address. The logs told a story in real time. I saw the timestamps of when she was active on messaging apps, Signal and Telegram apps that are encrypted and often used for discrete communication. The traffic spikes on these apps coincided perfectly with the time she was in the bathroom or taking a nap in the bedroom. I cross-referenced her location data. She used a rideshare app linked to our family profile. I looked at the destination history. There were 5 drops in the last month at an address in the downtown warehouse district, a luxury loft building. I checked the property records for that address. It was not listed under Ryan's name directly. It was held by an LLC. I ran a quick search on the LLC's registration. The registered agent was Ryan's personal attorney. It was confirmed. The affair was not a past event. It was an ongoing operation. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the leather creaking in the silence of the room. The rain had stopped, leaving a gray, heavy twilight over the suburbs. I looked at the complex map of data I had assembled on my screens. Timestamps, financial transfers, geolocation pins, personnel files. For the first time since I found the drive, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The ambiguity was gone. This was no longer a marriage crisis. This was total war. They were attacking me on 3 distinct fronts. Emotionally, Sarah was extracting intimacy and validation from me while giving her loyalty to another man. Financially, they were using my resources to fund their affair. Professionally, Ryan was actively sabotaging my career to ensure I remained subordinate and manageable. They believed they were playing a game of secret lovers. They thought they were the protagonists in a romantic drama. They did not realize they had just declared war on a man who views the world through the lens of threat assessment and neutralization. I closed the laptop slowly. I could hear the garage door opening downstairs. Sarah was home. I heard her footsteps in the hallway, the jingle of her keys, the cheerful fake voice calling out, "Honey, I'm home." The brunch was so fun, you should have seen the food. I stood up, smoothed out my shirt, and composed my face into a mask of mild, affectionate disinterest. I was not ready to strike yet. An operation of this magnitude required a phase of precise planning. I had the intelligence. Now I needed the strategy. The moment I closed my laptop on the evidence, the nature of my existence changed. I sat in the darkening room and acknowledged a brutal truth. The marriage was not a patient on the operating table that could be saved with enough effort and therapy. The marriage was a corpse. I was no longer a husband fighting for his wife. I was an asset manager fighting to minimize losses in a catastrophic market crash. The goal was no longer reconciliation. The goal was extraction. In the military, we learned that the most dangerous time in an operation is immediately after contact with the enemy. The adrenaline spikes, the heart rate jumps, and the urge to engage in kinetic action, to scream, to fight, to destroy, is overwhelming. But in the corporate world, emotional outbursts are a tactical error. If I walked downstairs and threw the hard drive at Sarah, or if I drove to Ryan's loft and kicked down his door, I would lose everything. Ryan would spin the narrative instantly. He is the senior director, the calm, collected leader. I would be the unstable, jealous ex-military subordinate who cracked under pressure. I would be fired for harassment. Sarah would play the victim of a controlling husband, and they would win. To defeat them, I had to become something they did not expect. I had to become the gray man, boring, stable, predictable. I had to let them believe they were the smart ones, the masters of deception, while I quietly welded the cage shut around them. The next morning, I initiated the first phase of the counteroffensive, legal containment. I took a half-day of personal leave, something I rarely did, citing a dentist appointment, and drove to a high-rise in downtown Austin to meet with a divorce attorney recommended by a contact in forensic accounting. This wasn't a strip mall lawyer who handled amicable separations. This was a litigator who specialized in high-asset disputes and complex liability cases. I sat in a conference room with a view of the city and laid out the situation with the same detachment I use when briefing executives on a malware intrusion. I did not cry. I did not ask why. I asked about leverage. The infidelity is painful, Ethan, but Texas is a no-fault state, the attorney told me, tapping a gold pen on his legal pad. However, the employment dynamic changes the battlefield. If he impacted your earnings to facilitate the affair, that is tortious interference. That is financial damages. He gave me my marching orders. Do not leave the house. Do not empty the accounts yet. Document everything. Let them get comfortable. I left his office and went straight to a coffee shop to begin the second phase, corporate warfare. I logged into the company intranet and downloaded the employee handbook and the code of business conduct. Most employees click "I accept" on these documents without reading a single line. I read them like they were scripture. I found exactly what I was looking for in Section 4.2, conflicts of interest and fraternization. The policy was explicit. Relationships between managers and subordinates in their direct reporting line were strictly prohibited unless disclosed to human resources. Furthermore, any manager found to be using their position to influence, reward, or penalize a romantic partner or the spouse of a romantic partner was subject to immediate termination and potential legal action by the corporation to mitigate liability. Ryan hadn't just broken a moral code. He had exposed the company to a massive lawsuit. He was a liability. Corporations do not care about broken hearts, but they care deeply about liability. I opened a new secure file on my encrypted cloud drive. I named it the master file. This was my kill box. I began to assemble the narrative, not as a rant, but as a prosecutorial dossier. I created a chronological timeline that was irrefutable. Exhibit A, the video file from the Bachelorette party, June 14th. Exhibit B, Ryan's performance review of me, July 20th, where he blocked my promotion citing personal instability, ensuring I stayed under his thumb. Exhibit C, the project reassignment logs, August 15th, where he moved me off a high-visibility project that would have put me in front of the vice president, effectively capping my career growth. Exhibit D, the rideshare logs and credit card receipts proving they were meeting during company hours, charging meals to the corporate expense account. I built the file with the precision of a master architect. I wasn't just proving they were sleeping together. I was proving that Ryan was a predator who was cannibalizing the company's talent pool to service his ego and his libido. I was building a weapon that, once detonated, would leave HR with no choice but to cut him loose to save the host organism. The hardest part of the operation was not the research. It was the evening. I drove home at 6 p.m., just like I always did. I parked my car next to hers. I walked into the house where my marriage was rotting in the walls, and I put on the mask. Sarah was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine. She looked up and smiled that bright, practiced smile that I used to think was reserved for me. "Hey, how was your day? You're home a bit late." "Just wrapping up some compliance reports," I lied smoothly. My voice was steady. My pulse was 60 beats per minute. "Boring stuff. How was work?" "Oh, crazy," she sighed, taking a sip of the wine. "Ryan has us working on this huge audit for next quarter. He is so demanding." Hearing his name come out of her mouth, so casual, so innocent, sent a spike of adrenaline through my veins, but I grounded it instantly. I walked over to the cutting board where she had started chopping vegetables for dinner. "Here, let me help," I said. I picked up the chef's knife. The weight of it felt good in my hand. I started chopping onions, the blade moving in a rhythmic, fast cadence against the wood. Chop, chop, chop. Sarah came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist, resting her head on my back. "You're such a good guy, Ethan," she mumbled into my shirt. "I don't say that enough." I stood there, holding the knife, feeling the warmth of her body, the body I had seen on that video screen, giving itself to my boss. I felt absolutely nothing. No love, no hate. Just the cold, metallic indifference of a soldier waiting for the command to fire. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," I said, my voice flat. She squeezed me tighter, thinking I was being humble. She had no idea that I was already 3 steps ahead of her, and the trap I was building was almost ready to snap shut. The opportunity for the final strike arrived 2 weeks later, in the form of the annual Q3 leadership retreat. Ryan had organized the event at a sprawling 5-star resort in the Texas Hill Country, a place of limestone villas, infinity pools, and executive egos. The invitation was explicit. Spouses welcome. It was designed to be a weekend of networking, team building, and projecting the image of a cohesive corporate family. To me, it was not a retreat. It was a kill box. Ryan had made a critical tactical error. By inviting the spouses and the entire executive leadership team, including the chief human resources officer and the members of the board, he had concentrated all the key players in one location. He had built the stage for his own execution. Before we even packed our bags, I executed the financial phase of the operation. Under Texas community property law, I had rights to our shared assets until a divorce petition was filed. I logged into our joint brokerage and savings accounts and initiated a wire transfer of exactly 50% of our total liquid capital into a new, segregated account at a different bank. I didn't take a penny more than my legal half, but I ensured that when the blast wave hit, my war chest would be secure and accessible, while hers would be frozen in the ensuing legal chaos. We arrived at the resort on a Friday afternoon. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and desperation. I played my role to perfection. I wore the crisp polo shirt, shook hands with the vice presidents, and held Sarah's hand as we walked through the lobby. I watched Ryan closely. He was working the room, flashing his bright cap-toothed smile, but I noticed the micro-expressions of stress. He was looking at me too often. He expected me to be sullen, perhaps passive-aggressive, given the block promotion. Instead, I was relaxed. I was smiling. I clapped him on the shoulder and asked about his golf game. This confused him. In psychological warfare, nothing unsettles an enemy more than a target who refuses to act like a victim. My calmness was a signal he couldn't decode, and it was making him sweat. The main event was the Saturday night gala dinner in the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, open bar, round tables with white linens. We were seated at table 4, just 2 tables away from the C-suite executives. Ryan sat at the head of our table, holding court, pouring wine for Sarah, his knee brushing against hers under the tablecloth. They thought they were being subtle. They thought they were getting away with it one last time. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. The CEO was walking up to the podium to give his keynote toast. The room quieted down. The Wi-Fi signal was strong. I reached into my pocket, unlocked my phone, and opened my secure email client. The draft was already prepared. The subject line was stark and unignorable. Formal complaint, gross misconduct, conflict of interest, and abuse of power. Senior Director Ryan Miller. Attached was the master file, the PDF dossier, containing the compressed video evidence, the time-stamped chat logs, the promotion blocking emails, and the financial audit of their expense account fraud. I added the recipients, the entire board of directors, the chief human resources officer, the general counsel, and the external ethics hotline. I looked at Ryan one last time. He was laughing at something the CEO said, raising his glass of Cabernet. I took a sip of my water, tapped send, and watched the progress bar slide across the screen. Message sent. I didn't wait for the explosion. I turned to Sarah and whispered, "I have a headache. I'm going back to the room. You stay." She looked relieved. "Okay, sweetie, I'll come up soon." I walked back to our villa alone. The night air was cool. Inside the room, I didn't pack. I didn't panic. I poured myself a double pour of the Macallan 18 from the minibar, sat in the armchair facing the door, and opened my laptop. I loaded the Bachelorette video and hit pause on the frame where her face is clearest, looking into the camera. 30 minutes later, the door handle turned. Sarah walked in, flushed with wine and the thrill of the evening. "You missed a great speech," she said, kicking off her heels. "Ryan was just asking where you went." "Sit down, Sarah," I said. My voice was not loud. It was barely above a whisper, but it had the density of lead. She stopped. The tone froze her. She looked at me, then at the laptop screen facing her. She saw the image. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like a special effect. She didn't speak. She just made a small, choked sound. I hit play. The audio filled the silent hotel room. The music, the screaming, her voice slurring. "Don't tell Ethan." I let it play for 10 seconds, then snapped the laptop shut. "I know," I said, my voice clinical. "I know about the apartment downtown. I know about the promotion you helped him steal from me to keep me in my place. I know about the $400 of champagne I paid for while he was touching you. Ethan, please, I can explain. It was just..." She stepped forward, hands shaking. "Stop." I cut her off. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a notification. I moved half our money to a secure account this morning. The divorce attorney has the paperwork ready to file on Monday. And as of..." I checked my watch. 45 minutes ago, the board of directors and the ethics committee have the full file, including the video. Her eyes went wide with a horror that was absolute. "You sent it to his bosses." "I sent it to everyone," I corrected. At that exact moment, her phone on the dresser lit up. Then it vibrated. Then it rang. It was Ryan. I didn't need to answer it to know what was happening downstairs. I could visualize it perfectly. The general counsel whispering to the CEO, the security team moving into the ballroom, the tap on Ryan's shoulder, the escort out of the side door to a conference room where a severance agreement and a non-disclosure agreement were being hastily printed. Sarah looked at the phone, then at me. She started to cry ugly, terrified sobs of a woman who realizes the safety net has been cut. She wasn't crying for our marriage. She was crying for her reputation, for the scandal, for the sheer magnitude of the destruction. I stood up, finished my scotch, and picked up my room key. "Where are you going?" she screamed, panic rising in her voice. "I'm going to the lobby bar," I said calmly, walking past her without making contact. "I hear there's going to be an opening for a senior director position soon. I want to be there when they walk him out." I closed the door behind me, leaving her alone with the silence I had lived with for 8 months. The detonation was successful. The target was neutralized. The fallout was not an explosion. It was a controlled demolition. In the corporate world, when a senior director is exposed for exposing the company to catastrophic liability, the machinery of human resources moves with the speed and silence of a predator drone. The investigation was concluded in 48 hours. My master file was irrefutable. The metadata on the video, combined with the project logs and the promotion blocking emails, created a narrative of sexual harassment and retaliation that no amount of spin could fix. Ryan was not fired publicly. Corporations are too risk-averse for that. Instead, he was allowed to resign, effective immediately, to pursue other personal opportunities. But in the tight-knit ecosystem of Austin's tech sector, everyone knew what that meant. The Whisper network is faster than fiber optics. Within a week, his reputation was scorched earth. Recruiters stopped returning his calls. His LinkedIn profile went dark. He was radioactively toxic. He didn't just lose his job, he lost his standing. He was no longer the visionary leader. He was the liability that no board of directors would touch. Then came the domestic front. The divorce mediation took place in a sterile conference room with frosted glass walls. Sarah sat across from me, flanked by a junior attorney she had hastily retained. She looked smaller, diminished, the radiant bride replaced by a woman exhausted by the sheer weight of her own choices. She tried the emotional approach first. She cried. She talked about mistakes and forgiveness and 10 years of history. She tried to leverage the guilt of a failed marriage, hoping the man who used to love her would soften. But that man was not in the room. I sat in silence, my hands folded on the mahogany table. When she finished speaking, I didn't offer a tissue. I offered data. My attorney slid a single binder across the table. It contained the financial audit of the affair, the misappropriated funds, the debt she had racked up on secret credit cards, the projection of the legal fees she would incur if we went to trial with the video as evidence A. "We are not here to discuss feelings, Sarah," I said, my voice devoid of inflection. "We are here to discuss asset forfeiture and debt allocation." The negotiation was brutal because it was mathematical. I didn't want to ruin her life, I just refused to subsidize it anymore. I kept my 401. I kept my investment portfolio. I kept the liquid cash I had secured before the retreat. She got the house, which sounded like a victory until the reality of the mortgage payments and the property taxes hit her. She kept the furniture, the wedding gifts, and the memories. She also kept the massive credit card debt she had accumulated trying to keep up with Ryan's lifestyle. When she signed the decree, her hand was shaking. She looked at me one last time, searching for a trace of the husband she had betrayed. "Ethan," she whispered, "what are you going to do?" "I'm going to follow the protocol," I said, capping my pen. "Disengage, extract, rebuild." I walked out of that office and never looked back. My exit from the company was equally surgical. The chief human resources officer called me in for a private meeting. They were terrified I would sue them for the hostile work environment Ryan had created. I didn't want a lawsuit. I wanted a clean break in capital. We negotiated a severance package that was essentially hush money, 12 months of full salary, and immediate vesting of my stock options in exchange for a strict, non-disclosure agreement regarding the internal details of Ryan's departure. I signed the NDA with a smile. I took their money, shook their hands, and walked out of the building with a cardboard box and a bank account balance that looked like a lottery win. 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment. It was the antithesis of the suburban starter home. It was a minimalist loft in the city center, exposed concrete, floor-to-ceiling glass, steel fixtures. It was cold, clean, and quiet. The silence here was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating dead air of a lie waiting to be exposed. It was the peaceful silence of security. There were no hidden folders on the hard drives here, no phones turned face down on the coffee table, no inconsistencies in the logs. I poured a glass of whiskey neat, no ice, and looked out at the city skyline. The lights of Austin glittered like a circuit board in the dark. I thought about the man I was 8 months ago, the trusting husband, the loyal employee, the fool who thought that if he followed the rules, the world would be fair. That man was dead, a casualty of the operation. The video had destroyed my life, yes. It had incinerated my marriage and derailed my career path. But as I took a sip of the whiskey, feeling the burn in my chest, I realized a profound truth. That video saved me. It was the painful injection of intelligence that I needed to wake up. If I hadn't found that drive, I would have spent the next 10 years raising children in a fraudulent marriage, working for a boss who despised me, slowly losing my soul to a lie. The betrayal was the signal that cut through the noise. In war and in love, the person with the most information always wins. You can have the best weapons, the most money, and the loudest voice. But if you don't have the intel, you are just a target waiting to be hit. I swirled the glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. I had lost the girl. I had lost the job. But I was standing here, debt-free, clear-headed, and in total control of my own timeline. I raised the glass to the empty room, to the ghost of the man I used to be. Target neutralized, I whispered into the night. Mission accomplished. This story wasn't just about revenge. It was about the power of reclaiming your own reality. Ethan showed us that when trust is broken, the strongest weapon you have isn't rage, it is your mind. He refused to let humiliation define him. Instead, he chose clarity over chaos and self-respect over emotional destruction. Sometimes, the most painful truths are actually gifts because they free us from a life that was never real to begin with. You have the strength to walk away from anyone who doesn't value your loyalty. If you believe in standing up for the truth, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. I have a question for you. If you were in Ethan's shoes, would you have exposed them to the entire company or just filed for divorce quietly? Let me know your strategy in the comments below. Also, I love seeing our community grow. Tell me which state or city you are watching from today. Let's see where our squad is located.